Silent Hill 2 is a remake, of course, of the 2001, not just a survival horror classic, but a general PlayStation 2 classic. And it set a standard for not only the franchise, but also the genre. The story focused back then and now on James Sunderland, a grieving, bereaved husband that got a letter from his wife to visit him in Silent Hill. Now, the big twist that you find out right at the beginning of the story is the fact that James's wife Mary has been dead for 3 years at this point. So the great mystery for James is to enter this town that they had visited many years ago, before Mary got sick and eventually passed away, to discover whether or not she actually is in Silent Hill. And what comes from this experience for James is a confrontation with his psyche, with his trauma, and as we find out with the story progressing, is his actions horrific in nature toward his wife when she was essentially a feeble invalid. But James isn't the only person that has been pulled into Silent Hill, as we interact with several characters, including Maria, who is not only a physical manifestation of temptation for James, but most importantly from a gameplay perspective, follows him and has to be protected at all costs when she is by James's side. Now, the story has been fleshed out a little bit. Characters like Eddie and Angela and even Laura have been given more dialogue, even if the general presentation for each of these characters is still rooted in the original game.
We met back at the apartment building.
Yeah, I remember.
I see that you didn't make it out yet.
Yeah. I just didn't get around to it yet.
Well, at least you got your appetite back.
By fleshing out these characters, by fleshing out the overall story, be it extra cutscenes, extra dialogue, or even collectibles that give more nuance to what is going on in Silent Hill and how the people in this trapped, horrific town are trying to cope with what's going on. We are given a fleshed out and even grander experience than what we had in 2001. And that also flows into the gameplay. Similar to the original Silent Hill 2, most of the combat is rooted in melee attacks. First you get a wood board with nails, followed by a steel pipe. And in New Game Plus, you can pick up a chainsaw that usually takes down enemies in one hit, beyond the bosses that may take a couple more hits. Alongside the melee combat is now the ability to dodge. In the case of the PlayStation 5, it's by hitting the circle button that you can perform dodges alongside the movement with the analog stick. And 9 times out of 10, the dodging works exceptionally well to avoid attacks with a pretty lenient window when trying to figure out the striking patterns of each enemy. Though the ability to block like it was in the original Silent Hill 2 has been removed, so we don't have this kind of ode to what we've seen recently in a game like Callisto Protocol, where you had the ability to parry attacks and block attacks with a well-timed button press, which I think may have been pretty beneficial in this game because there is more action associated with Silent Hill 2 the remake than it was in the original game, mostly because of the enemy's aggressiveness. They are a lot more forward in their attack and their approach. A majority of the time you could actually run past most adversaries in the original Silent Hill 2, whereas with this game, you will be chased if you don't get far enough away and lose their line of sight or line of hearing if you're fighting something like the nurses. This means learning enemy attack patterns, dodging, and landing those significant melee attacks is very crucial in comparison to the original Silent Hill 2. There are firearms as well, and they are a lot more player friendly compared to the 2001 iteration. But for gamers that may need a little bit more of a helping hand when it comes to melee combat and firearms, there is no hard lock-on system. You will have to move the camera, or in the case of shooting the reticle, to aim and hit your target properly. Ironically enough, there is something of a lock-on system when you down an opponent and you try to hit them with a melee attack. You may not even be aiming for them while they're down, or they may have already been deceased, and hit the strike button in an attempt to, say, break a glass so you can get a bottle of health, and you will inevitably hit the enemy instead of hitting the glass. Enemies can also armor through attacks at times where their animation has already started. You will hit them, but they will still go forward and hit you. There will also be times when you attempt to cancel your swinging animation during a melee attack to dodge, but since you've already put the animation input in, it will still go through and you may still get hit. And then there is, of course, the inconsistency when it comes to shooting certain enemies, where one enemy of the same type may only take a couple of bullets. Another enemy later on, of once again the same type, will take twice as many bullets to be put down. And even though James doesn't become a hardened warrior with extra lives and armor, the amount of resources that are given to the player if they thoroughly search every area that they go into will provide them a lot of health bottles or syringes, and of course ammunition if they do want to shoot those guns and don't want to have, as I did in my first playthrough, a melee only playthrough. And if the player finds that the combat or even the puzzles are a little more difficult than what they want to handle, they can turn down the sliders to light on both puzzles and combat and make it a more laid back experience. It also must be noted that very early in the game you get the radio which signals when an enemy is nearby, though it doesn't work all of the time because the mannequin enemies that try to pretty much sneak attack James whenever the light isn't on them, the radio won't signal that they are near him until they spring from their hiding spot and try to attack. Turning off the radio made for a more immersive experience and really helped learn the sounds of certain enemies when they were nearby. Blooper Team made a concentrated effort to try to make the 2024 remake a lot more of a player-friendly experience, right down to the map. Now, one of the biggest things about Silent Hill as a game and as a franchise is the necessity of figuring out paths via the map. But in the original game, James didn't mark points of interest or, say, a locked door on the map like he does in this version, which makes it so much easier to figure out your pathways and where you need to go, especially considering there are several levels with some intricate puzzles that will have you searching high and low to figure out what you have to do. And without those map markers, it would be pretty frustrating for the player, if not impossible, without a video guide to watch, considering the game doesn't really hold your hand and tell you exactly where you need to go next. On the opposite end, the darkness of the overall game is a lot more profound once James gets the flashlight, and it will make certain levels, especially like the prison section, a harrowing and arduous task, especially on your first playthrough. That's not to say that the game looks terrible or muddied. In fact, it looks absolutely fantastic and one of the best examples of what a remake in 2024 can be for a game that came out over 20 years ago. But it isn't perfect from a technical standpoint. There were several sections where I noticed frame rate drops, especially in the more foggy areas, graphical glitches, including James getting stuck near angles where you have to go up or down stairs, and camera issues when in enclosed areas, especially when you're fighting multiple enemies at a time. On the opposite end, when it comes to technical prowess and better presentation, is the voice acting. The voice acting is a lot better in this version, which is not surprising considering the voice acting of video games in 2001 pales in comparison to what we've seen in the decades that followed.
And how do you know about Mary?
I just do. What's the big deal?
Why can't you just tell me?
You gonna yell at me if I don't?
No. I won't. Please, just...
There are also better implementations of vibrations in the case of the DualSense when it comes to the PlayStation 5, where you will have certain moments like raindrops actually lightly vibrating the controller. Or if you're in a hectic situation and James has been hit multiple times, you will feel more of a vigorous vibration in the controller to alert you that not only is he low on health, but James is in physical stress as his heart rate has increased dramatically. There's also, of course, the soundtrack, with the original composer returning to remake some of his classic sounds and classic songs from the original soundtrack of Silent Hill in 2001. And he does a great job of not only reimagining some of those songs, but even adding to certain scenarios and scenes that we didn't have music to in the previous game.
I need to find someone.
Oh.
And Eddie, be careful.
Yeah. You too.
And though Silent Hill 2 Remake is getting a lot of praise and feels like a must-play experience right now, the truth is that the game in general, as good as it is, as great as it is still a game that doesn't have a plethora of content to keep you coming back for more. My first playthrough, where I got all of the collectibles and the 3 endings that are associated with your first playthrough, thanks to a very timely save right before the final boss battles, and apparently doing all the right things where I didn't have to do much to influence getting the 3 endings, was completed in a little over 14 hours. And then I did a New Game Plus run where I got the remaining 3 endings from the original iteration, as well as 2 new endings by completing the game and attaining certain items that were specific to New Game Plus in a little over 5 hours. So generally speaking, even by taking your time and getting everything, it takes about 20 hours to complete everything Silent Hill 2 has to offer, which is good if not for a $70 price tag. $20 cheaper, and I would say get it right now. But in my heart of hearts, as good as this game is, as wonderful of an experience as it is, and most importantly, as well as it does in capturing lightning in a bottle in the same way that Silent Hill 2 did all those years ago, it is a game that is made to wait for a slight sale. Doesn't have to be overboard, doesn't have to be half price. But no matter if you get it now or wait for it to go on sale, there is nothing more horrific than surviving a fight with Pyramid Head and deciding that you want to go in for one last blow, even though it's decided that it is done trying to cut you in half.